Hello, my name is James Wakoyak, and today I'm going to talk about the election of 1876 and the Compromise of 1877. This is also known as the end of Reconstruction in the South. Just some background information. The two presidents beforehand, Johnson and Grant, were both ineffective and both held controversial terms to begin with. Johnson was a very controversial figure as a vice president, and then when Lincoln was assassinated, he was now the president of the United States, but he was dealing with a Republican Congress, and they did not get along at all. He was actually almost impeached and was shy by one vote of being kicked out of office. Grant was a Republican, but he was a trustworthy president, but he put too much trust in his advisors, many of whom abused him, his trust, and he incidentally became part of the Teapot Dome scandal. In Congress, the radical Republicans were still adamant over the issue of racial equality, and were still a very popular force in Congress. But as time went on, most of the nation was starting to realize that Reconstruction was very expensive, and many of the northern states who were fully supportive of it started to view it as wasteful in funds. When they signed, most of the people who signed up for this were actually looking for a quick and simple solution. They weren't expecting this to drag on and on and on. However, it did. In the South, Reconstruction was entering its 12th year. There was constant resistance from white supremacist groups such as the White Supremacist League and the KKK. Many of the incidents recorded were violent and resulted in many deaths. Actually, in April 13th of 1873, the infamous Colfax Massacre, where white Democrats attacked and killed over 100 Republican freedmen and militia. The Democrats attacked because they wanted to intimidate many of the freedmen to not vote. However, the election itself would be one of the most controversial elections ever in American history. This election would actually be the final nail in the coffin, as you could say, for the end of Reconstruction. The candidate for the Democrats was Samuel J. Tilden, and the candidate for the Republicans was Rutherford B. Hayes. Let's just take a little look at the candidates. Rutherford B. Hayes was a Civil War veteran. He was actually wounded 4 times and survived, which is very lucky of him, you could say. In 1867, he was the governor of Ohio, and he served until 1872, where he actually retired from the political atmosphere for a while, until the Republicans called him back again to try and campaign as president. Samuel J. Tilden, on the other hand, was from New York. In 1866, he was the chairman of the Democratic State Committee. And he was famous because while in New York at the time, he was a political reformer, and he actually brought down Boss Tweed, who was a corrupt political machine, as they called him at the time. Because of this newfound fame, he was actually elected the governor of New York in 1874. So what happened? The election itself was very much sectional, just as it was before. A lot of the southern states, ex-Confederates, who were very supportive of, again, the Democrats and the Republicans up in the north. The election showed that in 4 states there was a big controversy, though. In South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon, Tilden's numbers were landslide numbers. They were very high, almost 90%, I believe. Many of the Republicans asked, how could this happen? We knew that they were, especially down south, that he had a high support, but almost 90%, something can't be right. So it was no secret that there was intimidation of African Americans against voting through violence, especially through branches such as the KKK and the white supremacist movement. Because of this, the Republicans called for a recount, and the new numbers showed that Hayes had won all the disputed states, which gave him 19 electoral votes. The Democrats, for lack of words, did not take it well at all. In fact, they actually refused to accept the results. The dispute went on and on. Eventually, the Democrats and the Republicans actually had to come together, and they formed an electoral commission. This consisted of 15 members. 10 were from Congress and 5 were from the Supreme Court. 7 were Democrat and 7 were Republican, and there was one independent party member known as David Davis. He was actually such an independent that when he saw that the decision he was going to make, he actually left his seat to go to find a Senate spot. And because he left, the only available people left to replace him were all Republicans. So pretty much it was 8 Republicans and 7 Democrats. And with majority rules, you can sort of bet what happened there. In the end, the final numbers, the official numbers at least, were Hayes had lost the popular vote by over 200,000 votes, but the Electoral College gave Hayes 185 credits because of the 4 states that he had been given, and Tilden was only given 184. Tilden and the Democrats were actually very upset by this, no surprise, and Hayes, because of his one electoral vote, had technically won the presidency, but because of the massive amount of popular votes against him, there had to be a compromise. And in 1877, the Democrats would agree to certain terms and conditions, and the Republicans would compromise with those. The compromise itself is actually known by many African American reformers as the Great Betrayal, because of what the Republicans bargained for, to have Rutherford B. Hayes given his presidency. So there were 4 actions that the Democrats would requested or demanded in order for them to accept Hayes as president. The first one was that all military would have to leave the South. That meant that this was essentially the end of Reconstruction. The states would have control again over their affairs without at least direct interference from the federal government. The second was that Rutherford B. Hayes wanted to take one Democrat and make him his cabinet member. Hayes would essentially give one of the lowest positions of his cabinet to the Democrat. And the third and fourth one pretty much go hand in hand together. The South demanded that the North would fund them money to industrialize their economy. So they would give them money to build factories and essentially be more competitive in how they manufactured goods. They would also expand on their railroad system in the South. The North, as you know, in the Civil War, had almost twice the amount of railroad available to them. The South wanted pretty much to expand their railroad to the West so they could use different trade partners, and that way they wouldn't always have to trade to the North. So what did it all mean? In the end, pretty much Congress and the the Republicans had actually given up on Reconstruction. The federal government was no longer going to actively protect the African Americans in political advancement because they had left all their military. Their military was leaving. The Jim Crow laws would actually take over a lot of the southern states, and they would form to further suppress African Americans from voting, and would be the headway for Plessy versus Ferguson and segregation. This is just an example of the whites versus coloreds. These are actually the starting of Jim Crow laws. So just to look ahead at what this meant, like the impact, this would mean again the rule and the reign of the Jim Crow laws in the South. Again, more African American intimidation from terrorist groups such as the KKK and the white supremacists league. This would also lead to the 1896 separate but equal court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, where again separate but equal. That was not. We all know that was not true. But this did bring about actually the new political reformers such as Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Booker T. Washington, as we know, was actually one of the founders of the Tuskegee Institution, and Du Bois was actually one of the founding members of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And these two pioneers would actually become one of the leaders of the earliest civil rights movement. So, to sum it all up, how would we describe the election of 1876 and the Compromise of 1877? In the end, the South would be left alone and would end Reconstruction, and the North would help industrialize the economy, and essentially the African American freedmen were essentially left alone with the now obviously racist Southern states. So how would this all turn out? We'll figure it out next time in the lessons. Thank you very much. Study up.